We thank you for tuning in tonight. I guess what I'm going to do is just we have three folks that are with us this evening, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce everybody and then turn the microphone over to you. First of all, Bridget Mckenna. Bridget, could you raise your hand? Or maybe people can see who you are. Bridget was born and raised in South Boston, Massachusetts, and has connections to the Cape dating back to the Mayflower. After graduating from Boston Latin School, she completed her undergraduate degree in biology at the University of Massachusetts Amherst with honors, which is not an easy thing to do. She began researching North Atlantic right whales at the Center for Coastal Studies as an intern in 2013. And since then, she has obtained her master's degree from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. Between past field seasons in Cape Cod Bay, Brigid has been a member of the New England Aquarium's right whale team, conducting research in the Bay of Fundy and also in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And she has worked as a marine mammal observer for NOAA, that's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So a very, very talented young woman. And welcome tonight, Bridget. Next, I'll introduce Christy. Christy Hudak, there's Christy. And Christy's been a research associate with the Center on the Right Whale Ecology Program for over 10 years. So she's got a long tenure. After obtaining her master's degree in biology from Nova Southeastern University in Florida, Christy worked at the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission, heading the manatee program at the Tequesta Field Station. From the sunny shores of Florida, Christy brought her experience in marine mammal necropsies, rescues, tracking, aerial surveys, and photo identification to the cool shores of Cape Cod, where she currently focuses on the food resources of the North Atlantic right whale, as well as microplastics in the marine environment. Welcome, Christy. And now I have an embarrassing admission. I'm going to have to ask Amy to introduce herself because I didn't manage to collect the background information. So Amy, if you don't mind, I'm just going to turn things over to you to introduce yourself. And at that point, I think we can just get the program started.
No problem, Sue. I hope everyone can hear me. That was my technical difficulty on my end. I was sending my messages to Agnes and not realizing it wasn't going to you. So I started here at CCS as an intern with the Right Whale Ecology program in 2011. And then I went on to receive my master's in conservation biology at the University of Queensland in Australia. Since then, I've been working on plenty of aerial surveys and behavioral response studies across the globe. And then I returned back to CCS in 2016, where I am currently an aerial observer, and I also fulfill the duties of the flight coordinator for the aerial team here at CCS.
Thank you so much, Amy. And why don't we go ahead with the first presentation? I guess, Agnes, you're doing screen sharing, and take it away.
All right, let me share my screen with you. Can you hear that? No? Let's try again.
Good evening. Thank you
How
for
about
joining
now?
us for the last Napi's lecture series of the 2021 year. Christy and I will be discussing a summary of our right whale field season for 2021. I'll be going over the vessel and aerial sightings, and Christy will debrief us on the habitat side of things. Center for Coastal Studies was founded in 1976. The right whale studies began in 1984. So we've been doing this for quite a long time. Initially, it was focused on vessel surveys, so on RV Shearwater, some of our other research vessels. And then in 1998, we expanded to aerial surveys of Cape Cod Bay. So we've had a really longitudinal study of right whales in the area and a really long-term data set that's been really critical in understanding the species. Our main season is between January and May 15th, and that's typically when we find right whales, but we do some exploratory surveys before and after those dates. For aerial surveys, this is our aircraft that we survey in. It's a Cessna Skymaster. high-winged, push-pull engine, really quite small. We call it a little tin can. We fit 2 pilots and 2 observers. The observers rotate between photo and the left seat, which has our window port for the camera, and then the right seat for data. So to summarize quickly, just all the work we've done this season, we flew 28 surveys of Cape Cod Bay and adjacent waters, which resulted in about 164 flight hours. We flew over 14,500 nautical miles and took over 20,000 photos, which we have to process individually. Our survey area is mainly Cape Cod Bay. This is a little outdated because it doesn't have the updated critical habitat lines, but it does represent our track lines. We have east to west track lines in Cape Cod Bay and a little bit north, 1 through 15. They're 1.5 nautical miles apart. And then we have 1 track line off the eastern outer shore. So you can see 16. That is about 3 nautical miles parallel to the coast. Our aim is for surveillance, so we're trying to document any individual that is present, and so this kind of gives us a full coverage. So this is our main focus throughout the season that we keep revisiting, even if we do surveys elsewhere. To show you kind of what our busy day was this year, in red you can see our tracks from April 27th, where we documented 86 right whales, and you can see where we broke our track lines to circle. So that's, if we overlaid the sightings there, you'd see yellow dots of where individuals or groups were sighted. And so aerial perspective is much different than vessel's perspective. We're fortunate in the plane to be able to see a lot further out. We can see the whole animal while we're circling. It's a really good viewpoint. Whereas you can see here, our research vessel Shearwater, that's a couple of whale lengths behind, probably can just see a little water disturbance, possibly the peduncle of this subsurface feeding whale. So they have a lot more challenges to document individuals. However, they got a lot done this season. They were able to complete 19 surveys of Cape Cod Bay, which totaled in 134 plus boat hours. Over 888 nautical miles were surveyed, and over 5,000 photos were taken. Again, individually processed, so really time consumptive. And over 500 zooplankton samples, which are meticulously counted. So to have kind of a look at what the year sightings look like, here is a map. The Sightings Advisory System, which now illustrates Whale Map, has all right whale sightings visible to the public, so it's a really good resource for stakeholders, vessels, things like that. These are not just our sightings, these are any opportunistic, other platforms, other researchers throughout the year, and each circle represents a sighting. It doesn't represent one individual necessarily, so those can be groups. And with that said, they can be duplicates of individuals. So this is over 700 sightings. There aren't over 700 right whales alive, but that kind of shows their distribution and presence in 2021 so far. So to kind of go over the height of our season, typically our peak is mid-April, but it can range anywhere from late March to late April. April 3rd, as you can see here, this is our post-flight map. We saw 63 right whales. Again, the icons represent sighting events and not individuals. There's a real linear kind of distribution on the eastern side of the bay, and then they kind of hug Race Point, as you can see up in the north. Historically, when they've done this, it means they're getting ready to leave, which is what everyone thought was happening. So the next flight on April 9th, we documented 78 right whales, which is more, but as you can see, the distribution shifted. We have a couple of sightings, less than 10, in the northern part of the bay. And then we also completed an eastern outer shore survey where we documented more. And so when this happened, it kind of suggested that they were leaving the bay and possibly going to their historical spring-summer ground of Great South Channel. April 14th kind of reaffirmed that with 20 right whales, and this is kind of when everyone really got concerned. Where did they go? As you can see again, really wide distribution, really shifted from the one before. And then it picked up again. So on April 18th, our flight, we documented 49 right whales. You can see how densely aggregated they are. The furthest kind of distribution's probably a little over 7 nautical miles, the ones in the middle of the bay. So that's a lot of tight circling just to document them. And then we had, a couple sightings that were east of Orleans. We also decided to survey Massachusetts Bay. So those are our track lines there. We saw a bunch of other species. You can see that the right whales are a little spread out, but there seems to be a little pattern on the western edge of Cape Cod Bay and Mass Bay along the shoreline. And this is kind of similar to 2018 when there was a lot of shore sightings in Nahant and off of Boston. So when that happened, it was pretty quiet in Cape Cod Bay, and then they all came back in, which is what happened this year. So April 24th, we had 80 right whales that we sighted. And as you can see again, really tightly aggregated, almost a pattern you can try to visualize in the bay, but a little northeast aggregation. So 80 right whales, all within probably less than 15 nautical miles of each other. So really tightly grouped in Cape Cod Bay. What resulted of all of our efforts was we were able to identify 234 individual right whales. So on the left, you can see a table that summarizes the number of individuals we were able to identify throughout the years since 2000. It fluctuates quite a bit. Starting around 2010 or so, a little give or take, is when we started really seeing an increased usage of Cape Cod Bay. And the most we have seen in a year was in 2011 with 325. On the right, you can see the best population estimate provided by the consortium. And so in blue, you can see that line that increases from 1990 till almost 2010, and then it starts to decline. You can also see the accompanying range of uncertainty. So because there's a bunch of different metrics they use to try to figure out what the population size is, it shows kind of a standard deviation of give or take the least and most that they presume alive. So at the end of October 2020, it was 356. So by that standard, we've seen over 65% of the right whale population this season. To break it down, we've seen the majority were adult males at 110, and then second was 70 adult females. The rest were juveniles or calves. What's interesting is that there are more adult males presumed alive than adult females, so it kind of reflects the population status. And also with that said, there's about 100 breeding females presumed alive, and so we've seen 70 of them, which is a lot, and everyone, for the most part, seemed in pretty good shape. Breeding females are really important to the population, and to demonstrate this, here is a family tree of an individual named Wart, an adult female who has contributed over 20 individuals to the population, as you can see here. It just kind of demonstrates the importance of one whale's survival to the population of right whales. And interestingly enough, she's a great-great-grandmother. 3 of her granddaughters, you can see Infinity, Millipede, and Bocce, were all moms this year. So it's just continuing the importance of her family tree and her lineage. And speaking of mom-calf pairs, there were 17 mom-calf pairs documented between the Mid-Atlantic and the Southeast US this season. One, unfortunately, has already been killed, and that's Infinity's calf. It was struck by a vessel off of Florida, and unfortunately, Infinity had also been hit, but she has not been sighted since. We and other teams kept our eye out for her. Hopefully she'll be sighted doing fine, but we did lose a calf. So that means there are 16 remaining mom-calf pairs that could have come to Cape Cod Bay. Of that, we actually saw 13, which is really high for us. Usually we see 50% or less. So Cape Cod Bay seems to be an increasingly important area for mom-calf pairs as well. Our mom-calf pair season began on March 3rd. I was photo in the plane, and I came across this guy. We try to review our photos while we're serving just to make sure everyone looks good, or for IDs. And this one, because it's so big and has callosity, I kind of assumed it was a yearling, and that was wrong. The next animal we saw was this one. And so we collaborate a lot with the research teams in the Southeast, and we share our sightings, and they tell us who are moms this year, and we try to memorize them. So because of their efforts, I knew that Millipede was a mom. and was able to ID her in the field based on her prop scars on her right flank, which is her namesake. So we saw her next. She was about almost 1 nautical mile away from the first one, and quickly we put it together that, yes, that was probably your calf. And so we decided we need to wait and document them together, especially because it was the earliest we've ever seen a mom-calf pair from the southeast in Cape Cod Bay since our research began, and just to confirm that it was her calf and not just a yearling that was in the same vicinity. The calf had other plans. You can see here he was hanging out with some right whales that were not his mom, and they were pretty far away from each other. We ended up having to circle for 40 minutes before they reunited, but fortunately they did. We were able to confirm Millipede arrived with her 2021 calf successfully, and everyone looked good. So that was great. And so we actually resighted Millipede and calf quite often through the season. They stayed almost 2 months. So they were in the area, and she was, feeding almost all the sightings, and the calf was really independent and documented from shore, from RV Shearwater, and from our aerial team. And in no particular order, we also had Nickerson and calf. They arrived on March 21st, and we got to have really good looks of them, especially of Nickerson skim feeding from the vessel. Bocce and calf, and you can kind of see that Bocce's calf has a little wound on its dorsum, but it doesn't look that severe, so hopefully it's okay. We tended to see a lot of mom-calf pairs hanging out in the same area, which might be typical, but it's just because we don't usually see that many pairs in one season. It was a little abnormal, but still fun. And Bocce and calf were seen quite often throughout the season as well. Champagne and calf. Champagne was seen alone on March 30th, and we weren't able to stay for the sighting, so we didn't document the calf, but fortunately she was resighted with the calf on April 14th and a couple days after that. Champagne's calf doesn't look as healthy or robust as some of the other calves, and we don't know why. As you can see, it looks a little skinny. Its skin isn't as black and healthy, but hopefully it makes it. We had Grand Teton in calf. She was seen April 9th, as was Magic in calf, and 3720 in calf. The last 3 were seen multiple times as well, extending pretty much to the end of April to early May. Binary and calf were first sighted end of April, so a little later than others, on April 27th, but her and her calf were seen 3 more times. 3942 in calf, she does not have a name. She's a progeny of Kleenex, who's another prolific female of the population. This pair was first seen by us on May 3rd and last seen on May 7th. Monarch and calf, first seen May 3rd and also last seen May 7th. 3130 in calf, first seen end of April as well, and then a couple more times after. Last sighting was on May 7th. The last mom-calf pair we saw was Giza and calf, and that was on our May 7th flight only. As you can see, conditions weren't great, but luckily we flew and were able to capture their presence in the bay. Her calf was one of the last known born in the southeast, and as you can see, it looks quite small compared to the others. And because they had just arrived, I had expected them to stay, but on our following flights, they were not resighted, so they left with everybody else. And the final mom-calf pair that we saw was Chaminean Calf. She was seen on April 24th and May 3rd, both outside the bay off of Truro, and was not documented inside. She has a really interesting story. So she was born in 2008, and in 2011, our aerial survey team was doing a flight in Cape Cod Bay, and they came across her entangled. So you can kind of see the line. It's coming from the left head around the baleen, through the right, over her back, under her peduncle, over the right fluke lobe. And so the aerial team called disentanglement team Mittermayr. If you ever need the number, here it is. You can Google it. You can also hail the Coast Guard. It's always good to report as soon as possible so they can get on scene. And they fortunately were able to respond, and they were able to successfully disentangle her. So that was in 2011. And you fast forward, And 10 years later, she's a first-time mom. We were really excited because, again, demonstrates the importance of each individual's survival and how they can contribute to the population. The only thing is that we don't know how her entanglement affected her. It's possible she was delayed in getting pregnant or giving birth because of it, because traditionally they start calving around 10 years old. But we're just really happy that she was able to have a calf, and it seems in really good shape. Unfortunately, we did have a couple of entanglements that we cited this season. The first is cottontail. So we were surveying south of the islands in October, and we were actually looking for a different entangled whale, Dragon's calf, who was sighted off of New York, really, really bad condition. And we came across cottontail. So we called our disentanglement team, who came all the way south in Nantucket from Provincetown on October 19th. And they were able to attach a telemetry buoy for tracking. They tried to remove some line, but we did have this telemetry buoy that was transmitting the sightings location so that they could then try to respond again. It is a tricky entanglement, because you can kind of see that there was a head wrap involved that seemed embedded, and that those are really difficult to access and remove. We were able to reset him on October 24th, but after that he left the area, and because of the telemetry buoy, we know he went to Canada. So we informed the Canadian teams. They started surveying and did not re-sight him until February of this year. So there was a drone operator in Florida on the beach, and he documented cottontail still entangled in much worse condition. He called the local disentanglement group. They responded. Unfortunately, they weren't able to disentangle him, but they also attached a telemetry buoy. They were able to see some of his movements before it stopped transmitting. Unfortunately, just a couple weeks later, his carcass was found off of South Carolina. You can still see the line and out of his mouth, and there were sharks that were predating on his carcass. So a really unfortunate end. The other entanglement that we documented was this individual snow cone. This was on March 10th in Cape Cod Bay. We were doing our regular Cape Cod Bay survey and came across her. You might have heard of snow cone before. She was a first-time mom in 2020, and unfortunately her calf was found dead off of New York after being struck by 2 different vessels weeks apart. So snow cone, unfortunately, we found her entangled, and the concern was, if you can see in the lower left picture, is that it looks almost like a similar head wrap, an embedded line almost, as cottontail, and it didn't work out well for him, obviously. So we called the disentanglement team. They responded. They were able to get a ton of line off. She was trailing over 200 feet of line. They made some good cuts. They attached a telemetry buoy. We were on the lookout again because of sea state and daylight. They had to return to dock. So on our next flight on March 12th, we resighted her. We again called Mittermayr. They responded. They were able to cut even more line. But as you can see in the right photo, she was really evasive. So she was getting a lot of distance between her and ibis. So they were, hopeful that with enough line cut from her that it was possible that she would shed it on her own, but to be on the lookout so that other attempts could be made if she's resighted. Unfortunately, on May 10th, the DFO aerial team, which is the team based out of Canada, they were surveying the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and they sighted her. There was no change in configuration. She looks a little worse, but not terrible. And there is a disentanglement team, the Campbell Whale Rescue Team, that was able to respond. They trailered their boat and went to work, and they were able to remove even more line. So everyone's on the lookout for her again, just to see what her status is, to see if anything else can be done for her. And we are hopeful for her. That was a brief summary of our right whale season in Cape Cod Bay and adjacent waters. Christy will tell you next what brought them here.
All right, thank you, Brigid. Yes, it's all about the food. Food, glorious food. So right whales come to Cape Cod Bay mostly to feed, and their food resource is the plankton, the zooplankton to be exact. Now let's talk about what we do here at the Center for Coastal Studies in the right whale habitat program. So we will focus on the boat surveys, looking at right whales, but also what they're feeding on and what they're not feeding on. So here you'll see our right whale research vessel, Shearwater, as we're flying through the seas. Now let's focus on our crew. They are a very hardy crew. We go out in rough seas and rough weather, rain, snow, sleet. We've done it all. And our crew studies the zooplankton resource throughout Cape Cod Bay in areas of the feeding and non-feeding right whales and other animals as well. We focus on 9 regular stations. It's the source of the patches and also the source of the food that right whales are coming in for. Other stations we focus on are what we call special stations, where right whales are feeding or we see a slick in the water just to find out what type of plankton is out there. Now, the type of plankton we obtain is all sorts, multiple, from jellyfish, fish larvae, to fish eggs. And we do it in several different ways, whether it's doing a cast using our pump system and looking at what's down deep in the depths, or it's through the plankton tows and towing right behind our boat to find out what's up the surface and also what's down in the depths as well. Now let's focus on the plankton. So there are multiple different types of species and taxa. One of them is the Barnacle Larvae, and it's 2 different forms. We have the Napi, and then we also have the cyprids. They molt into the cyprids and then finally molt again into the barnacle you find on your boats and on rocks and also on different animals. Then we have some scary plankton that has nice big claws to grab onto other plankton, odd shapes and sizes, and some that are pretty cool that kind of sort of look like little peeps, those Easter candies that you find, the marshmallow candies. But right whales really don't care about any of those. They're mostly focused on 3 different species or taxa. One of them is during the winter time, it's the Centropages. The 2 types of Centropages are the Typicus and Humatus. But then there's also the Pseudocalonist, where we kind of bunch a bunch of species together called the Pseudocalonist complex. Now these have a very rich sources of oil that the right whales are focusing on for their energy. But they're pretty small compared to the Calonist and Marchicus. Now, as you can see here, they have a large oil sac and it actually expands throughout their entire body. And they're typically about 1 millimeter in length to 2 millimeters. But you know, it's not only just the individuals the right whales are going for, they're focusing on the patches and they want as much as they possibly can. And here we have a stormy male just chowing down on some of the plankton. And I'll talk to you about just a little bit of what we've been seeing this year. Now here we have a Pseudocalonist. In March, we did an in-path tow and we found the majority of that tow, we count as much as we possibly can, just a subsample of a large sample. And it was mostly made of Pseudocalonist, a little bit of Calonist, and then other plankton, other Copepods, which are crustacean types of plankton, Belemnoids, which are those barnacle larvae I've mentioned to you about, and Centropages. Now, it totally changes in April, where Calonist becomes the dominant species. And here we have Calonist, over 80% is in that sample, with a little bit of Pseudocalonist, other plankton, and other Copepods. Next, I want to show you just a little bit of how 2021 compared to the rest of the years in the past since 2012. And it's very comparable to the other years with the total zooplankton above 2,500. Now these are average densities that we found in the baywide samples. So as I said before, we typically take samples at 8 to 9 stations and looking at just the food resource throughout. And so as you can see in 2012 and 2013, those were 2 warm years, so we didn't have as much as we did in the later years. But it's really about certain species. And so I've pulled out Calonist Marchicus and Pseudocalonist. And again, it's pretty comparable to the other years as well. So it was another reason why right whales are coming back into here. We've got a pretty stable food resource. Again, it changes through the years as it did in 2012 and 2013 with very low densities. But overall, we're doing pretty good in the bay. Now, what else did we see in our surveys? Well, we have some humpback whales. We had 252 observed during our vessels and aerial surveys. Then there was also the minke whales, 84 of those. We had 83 fin whales and about 48 sei whales. Now, don't forget all those white-sided dolphins. We had about 1,000 of those. And of course, the seals. We had the gray seals, about 488 of those, and 317 harbor seals. And the piece de resistance, the basking sharks. Now, typically when we start seeing basking sharks, right whales are out the door. So that kind of gives us a telltale sign that we're ending our field season. And we had about 36 of those. Oh, but wait, there's more. We're not only studying marine mammals, we're also doing a couple of land animals too. We saw one coyote over by the Provincetown Airport, as well as several foxes. We had approximately 10 foxes and 2 dens, one with 6 kits and one with 1 kit. So it's overall a very, very good year. Now I just want to give a special thank you to all of you who stayed and listened to our short little talk. And another special thanks to all of those who've helped us, from Napi's, AvWatch, all the different foundations, all our members, the Mittermayr team, and all of the CCS members and private donors. Without you, this wouldn't be possible. Thank you.
All right, let me stop sharing. I hope you can all hear me. And as I mentioned earlier, please put all your questions in the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. There's already a couple, wow. So I'll ask the crew to look at those questions. They might want to answer some of them in writing, and they might want to answer other ones speaking to you. There's a question from Thomas. He says, so excited to hear about the sightings from this field season. If I may ask a question, do fecal samples reveal the presence of internal parasites within North Atlantic right whales? And if so, can severity of parasitic infection and their effects on the right whales be quantified from feces and or other matrices? Thanks in advance. Who wants to take that question?
Okay, I'll go for it. I'm not entirely sure what they do find in the feces whenever they do collect the right whale fecal samples. It's pretty soupy, and I do know they, actually, I really don't know what exactly they find, if they find any parasites in the right whales, but that is a really good question, and I definitely will look at that up, and hopefully I can send out a little email blast regarding that.
All right, thanks, Christy. There's another question from Alexander. He wants to know, I know that traditionally the Bay of Fundy, Cape Cod Bay, Great South Channel, and the Roswell Gulf are major feeding grounds, while Florida is a major calving ground. Are we seeing an increased utilization of the mid-Atlantic states by right whales?
I can go ahead and take that one. So we do have more data coming out of the mid-Atlantic states, but that is probably more of a factor relating to the amount of effort. So there were a lot more surveys that were taking place off of North Carolina and South Carolina this year. And obviously, as more scientific effort is there, there's more increased, just interest by the general population, people are becoming more aware of right whales migrating up and down the coast. So we get a lot more reported sightings from the public as well. So they definitely are, they have to make it from Florida and Georgia area all the way up to Cape Cod Bay in the northern waters. So we know that they're transversing those areas. What is kind of unknown is how long that residency time is and how long they're, how often they're moving back and forth between those regions. The other side of that question is obviously, Christy just touched on it briefly, that some of the food resource is moving, and so some of the traditional summer feeding grounds like Roseway Basin and the Bay of Fundy are no longer really housing that summer residency of right whales, and that's just because the food seems to be disappearing from those regions. Now, since 2017, we've really started seeing an increase in right whales going further north, and that kind of runs into the problem of overlap between shipping and fishing economies, while right whales are up in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which is just that much further north. Similar to a lot of other species with climate change, we expect to continue to see that polewards movement just as their food resource kind of changes regions.
All right, thanks, Amy. Kimberly wants to know what actually caused what appeared to be whales' early departure in mid-April and the subsequent continued sightings. Weather, food?
I'll take that one. Okay, so typically whales will follow where the food is going. And so if the food resource goes below the feeding threshold, because it takes a lot of energy for them to open their mouths and push their bodies through the water in order to filter out all that food. And so if the amount of food that they're getting in, the calories that they're taking in is less than what they're expending to get that food resource, then they're going to start finding other food resources. And that's typically when they start moving to another location.
Thank you, Christy. Richard says, thank you for the work you're doing. What else can be done to help the right whale population increase? Now that's an important question.
Yeah, I think we all have ideas, but really it comes down to giving them the space to, reproduce successfully. That means, and also being able to find their food effectively. We want them to be as robust as possible. And we have seen a huge increase from the numbers in the early 2000s up until 2010 that showed that they were able to be reproductively successful. And it's only just in the last 10 years or so that we've started seeing that precipitous decline. And I think really it comes down to making sure the population is as healthy as possible. So that means, limiting the effect of human causes, human injuries, such as from vessel strikes or from entanglements, and then also giving them time to really focus on the behavioral aspects that require, finding each other and being able to, be reproductively successful. I don't know if that was too broad of an answer.
Thanks, Amy. Jack would like to know, do white sharks prey on calves of the southeast coast in the winter?
I don't think there's ever been a documented case of predation of great white. Great whites are pretty intelligent, and so they won't go after something that's going to be a lot of work, like a calf with its mom. There was one individual in the population named Sharkbait, who has not been recited in quite a lot of years, that seemed to have evidence of a shark bite on its flank. But that's the only one I know of a live predation event. They tend to definitely take advantage of carcasses whenever they can. But an adult mom is a whole other story.
All right, thanks, Bridget.
I'll add a pun.
Donna,
more than they can chew.
I'm working two microphones here. Excuse me. Donna would like to know if there is a chronology of which whale species comes north first, which is second, which is last. Seems like the first ones would have the best shot at zooplankton, while latecomers would have to skip Cape Cod Bay and just go to Canada.
I'll take that one. Okay, so it's interesting you mentioned that because when the right whales first get here around December and January, they're popping in, they're popping out. Looks like they are feeding down deep. And it looks like they're feeding on Centropages and Pseudocalonist, and they're waiting for the calonist to come in. Others are probably looking at other areas just to see south of Nantucket. We've seen a lot of right whales that are feeding down there. And then once we get into late February and March, that's when the Pseudocalonist starts rising from the bottom. And we get a lot more right whales coming in, popping in and out, feeding on, looks like Pseudocalonist from our in-path tows that we've been taking. And then calonist comes in, it gets advected into Cape Cod Bay, where you start getting patches of calonist, and more right whales are coming in. So it could be those who are coming in early are fine with the Centropages and the amount of energy they're getting from those species, or they're just kind of hanging around. They've got nothing else to do, and just wait until the really good food resource starts flowing in and starts maturing into those late stage, teenager stage of Calonist fin margicus with the huge oil sacs. So it all depends on what the right whales are aiming for. And that's why some are coming in earlier, some are coming in later, and some are just staying the whole entire time because that's where they want to feed.
Thank you, Christy. For those who were a little late, yes, please put your questions in the Q&A box down below. Not in the chat. I will eventually get to the chat, but there's already a lot of questions in the Q&A box. For example, Laura would like to know if you are expecting calving grounds to move north as it becomes too warm further south and to reduce their migration north for summer food.
I think it's a possibility. They don't have to necessarily calve in the south. The hypothesis is they do it because of it's warmer water. So if the calves don't have as thick of a blubber layer to withstand the cold, that would help them, retain some calories. And then also it's higher salinity, so they should be able to float easier. But we did have an instance in 2013, a war at the family tree we saw, of a calf being born in the Northeast, and that calf survived fine. We see her actually annually. Her name is Pilgrim now because she was first sighted outside the Pilgrim power plant in Plymouth. But it's possible. I think they can give birth anywhere, but their calving ground historically has been off of Florida and Georgia. We know not all of them that give birth are sighted down there, so there might be another calving ground, or they might just go rogue and calve wherever they want. But I think it's definitely a possibility, but it's not something we expect.
Thanks, Bridget. Rogue right whales, who would have thought? Susan wants to know how many calories is a copepod and how many calories are consumed in a day by an adult right whale?
That is a very good question. The calories of a single copepod are in, it's estimated, I'm trying to remember, about, I would say 100 kilocalories, something like that. And then they would have to pretty much eat millions upon millions of copepods in order to obtain enough energy to keep on living. So it gets into the millions to even billions. And there's plenty of plankton out there, fortunately, for all the right whales, and also all the basking sharks and all the other animals that eat plankton.
Thank you, Christy. Ellen wants to know if there is any way we can increase the food production.
One thing is to actually start decreasing our carbon output. That's having an effect on the environment, which is having effect on the plankton. And if the plankton, specifically the primary producers, are wiped out from all the changes in the environment parameters such as temperature, salinity, wind, currents, and stuff like that, then we're in big trouble. But for us to be able to kind of lower our carbon footprint, it's going to help a lot. Now, people have been suggesting, oh, well, let's go ahead and do some farming of phytoplankton or try to increase it. Times that people have done that, they really make it worse. So we're trying to stay away from that and trying to let Mother Nature produce the primary producers.
Thank you, Christy. Sherry wants to know, she writes, you mentioned about the groupings of whales seen. Any idea if they are group feeding, as in using group tactics to coral food?
Go ahead and take that one. We do occasionally see cooperative feeding. It's nowhere near the group size that we see with humpback whales that might be doing bubble feeding together. I think our biggest one, we had something like 13 humpbacks on one of the more recent surveys in May, feeding up on Stellwagen, all bubble net feeding together. It was an incredible sight to see from the air. But for right whales, they tend to use more of a ram filtering, where they're just swimming straight through the cloud of plankton. And that tends to be, we might see two whales feeding in echelon really close together. It almost looks like a flying V that you see with geese. But they're really using each other as a slipstream, right? So any food that doesn't get into the first whale's mouth is more concentrated as it goes down the side of the body, and the whale that is feeding cooperatively can kind of trail slightly behind and capture any extra food concentrated by that movement through the water. But for the most part, they are feeding more independently than other species that we see.
Thanks, Amy. Lisa would like to know if there is any process for sharing information to protect the whales as they migrate up and down the coast. Are there other organizations who do what you do? Well, nobody does what we do.
We are very lucky to work in a consortium of researchers and policymakers and academics and conservationists that are all sharing a lot of data in real time. For our program in particular, we do actually share our sightings with the federal and state governments in near real time. We also do a end of survey report that we send out usually the same night that we get done flying. It's a really long day for us, but we manage. And I think Bridget mentioned earlier in the presentation, there is a website that you can go to. It's called Whale Map. You can just Google it, and it's one of the first things that pop up. And you can actually use this interactive website to look and see where the right whales are located. And those come in from a variety of sighting sources. A lot of those will be from the general public calling into the state and federal hotlines. A lot of them are coming in through researchers, and you can choose to see where the data is coming from. And then the other aspect of it is actually it's incorporating acoustic data as well. So there are a lot of gliders and hydrophones that are out in the water, and anytime that they are picking up right whale calls, they will also have the possible and the confirmed detections of where right whales and other species are located. So we do collaborate in real time, and we also share our observations and sightings info with the consortium as a whole, so that our data can be used in a broader context to start answering some of those questions that we have just relating to the species in general and the recovery.
Thank you, Amy. We have a question from Laura. As an endangered species dwindles, it loses its genetic variation and diversity. At what point will the North Atlantic right whale lose its ability to continue to breed healthy calves? Anybody?
That's definitely a concern. There's a bunch of geneticists, I think, I can't remember the university in Canada, but Fraser, I believe. And they've been studying the different haplotypes that the right whales carry and how that's changed over time. I think there's about 4 left, if I'm right, but it's something that is being monitored to detect whether or not they will be functionally extinct, but we're not at that point yet. So there's still enough genetic diversity that they're okay to breed successfully.
Thank you, Bridget. James wants to know who gets to name the whales.
So it's a very democratic process. Within the consortium, we have a meeting every year, and then we go review kind of all of the data that's been accrued, the status of the population, and we do naming. So Philip Hamilton, who might be on this, he coordinates the naming for the consortium. So there's about 10 to 15 individuals that get put up for naming. Anyone can submit an individual to be named, and then they can submit any name they want. And then there's about 3 rounds of voting before a whale gets named or there's no name. So we've been very fortunate that we're really good namers and people agree. So people tend to vote for our names, like Snow Cone and Fenway.
Thank you, Bridget. Alexander wants to know, jumping off the question of great whites, is orca predation an issue? I know we do not know much about orcas in the Western Atlantic.
Yeah, I actually haven't seen any on our aerial surveys, that they're pretty rare sightings, but we do occasionally see what are considered rake marks or teeth marks, a lot of times on the fluke tips, and those can at times be studied for the spacing and number, just to compare to different odontocetes species that might have caused those. And a lot of those are suspected to be from killer whales. That's a lot of the information that we can get by collecting these photographs, by just studying the population year to year. We can see when animals turn up between years, gaining new scars. But I think a lot more needs to be studied in that area to know how prevalent it is in the population.
Thank you, Amy. Grace would like to know what factors. Oh, Christy, I see Christy is answering that question as we speak. Grace, you can expect an answer soon. Let's see what other questions we have on here. Laura would like to know, are there any talks of adjusting shipping lanes in any region that right whales are using?
There were shipping lanes that were adjusted in the earlier years. One of the more successful ones that I know about is in the Bay of Fundy. And that was a very small, or what I would consider a minor change, and ended up saving, a lot of whales from vessel strikes. But, I think in the US waters, we have a lot of difficulties as far as the dynamic management goes, and it takes a really long time to establish trends. And as we're seeing right now, right whales do tend to switch things up as their environment changes. And so we always seem to be slightly behind the curve on that. One of the really impressive aspects of the Canadian management that came out of the unusual mortality event that started in 2017 up there, when the right whale started showing up in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, is that now they're starting to close specific areas where right whales are, and that's for specific fishing, or as they're in certain in certain shipping lanes, they start restricting the speed of vessels. And I think they have a large number of vessels and operators that are complying with those. And it just takes a lot of monitoring to be able to do that effectively. So I think something similar could be, that could happen here. But right now we have such a broad area to cover. It's really difficult to get a handle on where all the right whales are at any given time.
Thank you, Amy. Thomas would like to know a survey-related question. Were there any documented interactions between right whales and sei whales or any other species this season?
We typically do see sei whales and right whales feeding in the same area, and they could almost look like they're coordinated feeding together, but it's usually quite brief. This season, I can't remember if we actually saw them that close. We might have just a few times if we did, because we did see a fair amount of sei whales, but we did have a really cool sighting end of April or early May of a 2-year-old right whale with an adult fin whale and an Atlantic white-sided dolphin. So it kind of showed perspective of their different sizes all in one frame, which was really interesting. And, you can't help but think they had to be aware of each other. So they don't feed on the same resources, but they were in the same area.
All right, we are getting close to 1 hour. Let's see what other questions we have in here. So cool. Thank you, Bridget. That was Thomas. In the calving grounds, Grace would like to know, in the calving grounds, are there established safety zones where shipping and boat traffic is monitored and restricted to protect right whales?
I don't think any of us have worked in the Southeast, but I know that there's a bunch of teams similar to ours that are doing surveillance and population monitoring down there. And so I believe they alert the Coast Guard and Navy and vessels similar to us of right whale presence. I'm not sure to what extent it goes to. There is a mandatory slowdown in different critical habitats for vessels of a specific size seasonally. But I don't know what else is done in the Southeast for protection measures.
Thank you, Bridget. I see that Christy's making her way down the questions in the chat. Anita has written, we saw Blackheart and her calf on New Year's Eve in 2012 and Chaminean and her calf in December 2020, both times while vacationing on Amelia Island. We reported both sightings and sent pictures. How can I find out if Blackheart's calf from 2012 is still alive and if it has been named yet?
So the consortium has a North Atlantic right whale catalog. If you Google it, it'll come up. It's curated by the New England Aquarium. And it's really resourceful. It has all sorts of details of sighting history, sex, when they've calved, where they've been sighted, and just physical attributes. And that's how we often match. So if you Google that, you can go to, there's a mother actual column that you can search for. And so Blackheart, I think is, I'm going to butcher this, 3540 is 3540. So if you search for mother is 3540. If it comes up with an individual, it'll be the calf. It's possible some calves don't get included in the catalog because they aren't recited, so they don't get a catalog number. So if that's the case, then it probably did not survive, or if it did, it has not been known to be that same calf of Blackheart. I can look quickly and let you know, actually.
All right, well, Bridget does a little research here. Let's see what other questions we have. We can take maybe one more or two more. We're close to getting done. Thomas would like to know, were any right whales resurrected this season? I don't know exactly what he means by resurrected. Oh, Bridget does? All right.
Yeah, so if right whales aren't seen, I think it's over 6 years. They get presumed dead, but they're not declared dead. So if you search the catalog, they'll come up as living because their carcasses weren't confirmed. There was one 3593 who NEFSC, who's the NOAA federal team, they saw first earlier this season. I think it was January, south of the islands. And the last time it was seen was in 2012. And then we had that individual after outside of Massachusetts Bay. So it's only been seen, I think, 3 times in its entirety. And it was first seen in 2005, I believe. So 2005, and then 2012 was the most recent prior to this year. And so it's only had aerial documentation. We don't know what sex it is. We don't know who it's related to. So it's a really interesting individual. And I think that's the number. There's also a mom this year that's very rarely seen. And she was first sighted actually by the Mid-Atlantic teams with her calf. And it's one of the 3 that we did not see. So she's a really unique individual too, that's just not sighted that much. She goes someplace that some of the whales go and, you know, have sighting gaps and stuff like that.
All right, thank you, Bridget. As a last question to save Christy from typing, James would like to know, in a case such as Cottontail, why can't the rescue crew tranquilize the mammal?
So there has been some work being done as far as providing, I don't know if we'd call them, I don't know if they're called tranquilizers or not, but things to calm the animal. The problem is that these are really large free swimming animals, and we have to be aware of their biology. So they rely on their brain telling them to surface, when to surface, to breathe. And so we can't fully, we can't stop them from doing that. Otherwise they will just sink and drown, essentially. So there's a lot to still learn about dosing. And, I'm trying to think if they ended up using, who was the last one that they used?
Bela, I think, was the last time they've actually tried to sedate a right whale. But it was because she was in really poor health. That was kind of the only option, I believe, in order to try to disentangle her. Right.
And then they've been working on the delivery system for the free swimming whales. And I think it was with antibiotics with Dorace's calf last year, where they had huge success with the delivery system itself and getting medication. But in that case, that was antibiotics.
All right, thank you. Considering how hard it is to get pills into my dog, I can't imagine how hard it is to get antibiotics into a whale. We reached 8:05 actually. I don't know if Sue wants to take over and tell you all the farewell.
Thanks, Agnes. And I just want to thank everyone that was participating as our guests tonight. We had, I think I saw a high of 126 people had joined in, and I hope you learned a lot. I certainly learned a lot. We have an incredible team of people working on right whale ecology and understanding all of the bits and pieces that go into their lives. And the more we study and the more information we're able to obtain, the more we know and the more research we're able to turn into positive safety measures for protecting the species. So we do depend on people like you to follow us, to be a part of our work, and to support us in the best way that you can. And so I thank you, all of you, for your interest and your participation, and we look forward to seeing you again on another Napi's lecture. So good night, and thanks to all of our panelists as well. You did a wonderful job.